Hey everyone, welcome back to the Read Well podcast. My name is Eddie Hood, and this is episode 69. Today is a special day. We've been waiting for this for quite a while. I'm very honored to welcome Dr. Maryanne Wolf. She's a world-renowned expert in the art of the reading brain. She also works on language development and dyslexia. So Dr. Wolf, she completed her doctorate at Harvard University, and she focused in the area of human development and psychology. She also began her work in cognitive neuroscience and psycholinguistics. Did I say that right, Dr. Wolf?
Perfect.
All right. So we're doing good so far. She also holds an undergraduate degree and a master's degree in English Lit from St. Mary's College, Notre Dame, and Northwestern University. She's an English Lit lady. Love that.
Mhm.
And you've written a lot of stuff, 160 scientific articles. Is that right? Probably north of that now. I'm not sure. More. Yeah, my wife is a PhD and she has to write these articles, and I just look at her and go, "Oh, I had no idea what's involved in that."
Yeah.
Yeah. And then last but not least, her work has just achieved a ton of awards, from the Fulbright Fellowship to Christopher Columbus Award for Intellectual Innovation and the Einstein Award for Dyslexia. So I think we've got a lot to talk about today. I've got several questions that I want to address, really about what it means to reclaim our brains. I think a lot of us are really tired of the digital landscape. And so this is going to be a lot of fun. I just want to start off by saying, how you doing?
Eddie, I think I told you I just came back from the East Coast. Six lectures. I can't even say lecture anymore.
Tired, yeah.
These cities, and it was wonderful. And the whole point of most of this was to actually talk about what is happening to all of us, and that's from 0 to 99. In terms of what is happening to our reading as we read on screens and books, and what are the differences, and also what can we take from the research that is evolving but increasing, that shows real differences between screen reading and print reading, and what does that mean for children. So I'm always most interested, sorry, all of you adults, I'm most interested in the development of the species. So anything that we learn, I want to be able to apply to how we teach our young in better and better ways, whether it's dyslexia or whether it's English language learners with all their richness, or whether it's with children who have come from very difficult backgrounds for whatever reason. How can we help them achieve their best potential? So that's really the bottom line, is how can we make those future generations better than our own?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'd love to get into that because I have four kids, and so my mom taught me to read because she was a reader. She used to sit
Um,
and just read books, and I thought, what is she doing? And then I went and picked up a book and I just sat next to her, and that's how I became a reader, you know.
that's fantastic.
She didn't have to tell me to read because she was doing it, and I wanted to be with my
He
mom.
modeled for you.
Yeah, yeah. And so I did the same with my kids. Everywhere I go, I have a book, and I always read. It's now all for my kids. I always have books everywhere they go, and they are deep readers, and I love it. But I would love to get into that today because I'm really passionate about that as well. Before we go there, though, let's go up a level and let's just talk about the reading brain itself.
Mhm.
In your book, you talk about how our brains are not really designed for reading. We're more designed
That's
for
right.
talking. Have you? We invented this thing called language.
That's exactly right.
What is the reading brain?
So what I can remember thinking, when I wrote my first book for the public, which was called Proust and the Squid, the Story and Science of the Reading Brain. And I can remember thinking that it should begin with the baby and all that goes on in the development of the what is a normal typical brain, which is developing parts that will later be connected at between 5 and 7 into a reading brain circuit. But I was thinking about this when I realized it was like an epiphany, just like one of these Jean Piaget things. You think, oh my God, that's such a simple thought, but with such enormous implications. And there's no circuit for reading. There's a circuit for vision, for language, for thinking, for feeling that we come to this earth born genetically endowed with. Not so reading, not so math. These are inventions, just as you said, and an invention requires the brain to do something which is beautiful but unnatural, and that is to form a new circuit of circuits. So the reading brain is like it's as if a magician went down and say, connect vision, language, cognition, thought, motoric, and feeling, and connect them and make them go stronger and better and faster and more automatic so you can think. And so the reading brain is a circuit that we learned from either exposure or teaching to connect the parts of the brain that will later become the reading brain circuitry. And so my colleague Mary Lou Gornall-Timpany, who's a neurologist, always says, Maryanne, it's not one circuit, it's a whole lot of circuits. What I would like to tell your audience is that it's a circuit of circuits, a network of networks. But once you connect it, you have built a platform for reading to elaborate upon that first circuit over and over and over. And so all these parts, as they become developed more and more, and they are connected more and more, what you have is this beautiful, elaborated system. And my colleague Alberto Manguel always said this, that reading progresses in an almost geometric progression, almost like a spiral, so that it's constantly elaborating what went before and using it for each of these levels. So that reading circuit gets more elaborated, but allows then, when you read anything, to be read with more nuance, with more affect, with more thought, etc. So it's just a beautiful characteristic of the human brain that it can connect parts in new ways for new functions.
Oh, I love it. I also love how passionate you are when you talk. It's so nice to talk to humans who like this thing. It's very good. So when I hear the word circuit, I think of an electrical circuit. And I had an experience with my son. He's 10, my youngest, and he, of course, loves to read. But we got him into a book that was a little above his pay grade.
Right.
A little above the pay grade. And I saw that circuit, the fuse popped, right?
Exactly.
I'd love to talk, clearly it's possible to overload that circuit and everything just sort of shuts down. But it seems like you kind of have to read at your level or a little bit above your pay grade to keep developing that circuit.
That's right.
Can we speak to that a little bit?
You're quite right to say a little above is even better than at your own level, because it requires you to learn, and you're learning more about the grammar of language as you do that. You're learning more about the multiple meanings that lie under the surface of words. So the fact is that there was this wonderful a Russian psychologist named Lev Vygotsky, and he said, we like, if you think about learning, he made it like a zone, and he called it the zone of proximal development. And by that, he meant when you learn best, it's not just at your level, it's within the top level of the zone. So when we talk about kids and your 10-year-old, you have a zone for that 10-year-old that doesn't have him or her, reading what a 20-year-old, but what someone just above his level, that will just push him, and he will progress more. If you make it just at his level, that's fine, but it won't challenge your son very much. So a little challenge is a beautiful thing. Too much challenge, just as you said, will sort of break the circuit. And then too little challenge, or if you will, not using the full circuit, you can short circuit that. And that's where Actually, digital reading is often not using all of the circuits that are possible or at the depth that it's possible.
Okay. So
So that's
that
a
seems,
different kind of, if you will, question and response.
yeah, and that seems like a good opportunity to sort of jump over to that, the digital reading. I get asked a lot by people in the community, is it okay if I read my on my e-reader versus a paper book?
Mhm.
My response has always been, as long as you're reading, great, you do what
Mm,
you got to do, you know.
yeah.
But after I read this, I found that the digital world seems to be affecting us a little
Yeah,
different.
it does.
Why is it different? Why is reading a paper book any different than reading an e-reader?
So the good thing about an e-reader is that it's better than the laptop. And
Yeah.
because everything that we're talking about with the laptop or with your phone is vulnerable to distraction. You
Mhm.
make the reader truly susceptible to what is called the novelty reflex that all of us have. When we see something new, we go for it. If you see in your phone while you're reading some passage away, you see some message, you go for it. And it's you can train yourself not to do that, but it's tough because we are wired to look at what is the unfamiliar because it could be in our ancient reflex brain something that's going to kill you or something that you need to eat and survive. So the novelty reflex actually comes from our prey. It comes from when we were thousands of have had a brain thousands of years older than our present one, but it is especially problematic for young children because distraction is just pulling them away. So, but I don't want to go there yet. I will in a little bit. But your question is really, so what's the big difference? There's distraction, but there's also the what are called the affordances of different mediums. The affordances of print over these centuries have taught us to use that circuitry in ways that gives extra time, if you will, milliseconds. And when I say time, I'm really talking about just milliseconds. But that print has a characteristic or affordance in which they are trained, the circuit is trained to give extra time to inference, making analogies between what they know or what the print that is in front of them or the passage. Very, very importantly, when I talk about deep reading, that print as has as if you will, a specialty, a special characteristics, it's going to add these precious milliseconds to figuring out whether something is true or not. It's going to evaluate. It's going to be critically analytic. And that's super important if you're evaluating the truth of what you read or the beauty of what you read. Um, the reality is that the affordances of digital are to have as an advantage skimming so
Mhm.
that you can really skim that iPad or that e-reader, that Kindle or whatever you're reading on because you've been almost trained by your laptop reading or your phone reading to skim. And skimming is what short circuits the use of your empathic processes, your analogical processes, inference, and very importantly, critical analysis. Now, when we talk about deep reading, I will even add to that list. But print gives extra time for that. We're trained. And the digital screen, we have trained ourselves. And Walter Ong, the great philosopher who was the student of Marshall McLuhan, told us years ago, and he was so right, that this affordance makes an interior difference, not just we think it's an exterior something. It's just exterior to us. It's actually changing us interiorly. And that's where the reading brain gives us a more physiological understanding of what he meant philosophically. So when you have that circuit and you are skimming, you are by and large getting the surface of information, but you're not giving the milliseconds to be more probative. What are the words? What is the intent of the author? Is this misinformation, or even worse, disinformation? How are you processing all that with your critical, analytic, and your empathic skills? Skimming does not give you the same bandwidth. It's not that it's evil or bad. It's just it doesn't give it to you because it is training your brain to use, if you will, the surface. Now, people like Anne Mangan and Nicholas Carr, I talk about deep reading and they talk about the shallowing hypothesis. They're like isotopes of each other. You can go on the surface, the shallow, or you can go deeply. And print allows you more because historically that's what we've been doing. That's what its affordances include. Now, after saying that, there's no binary. I have people who can read deep, use those deep reading processes on a screen, especially something that they can take notes on, like some Kindles, the annotation mechanism can give you a chance to stop, pause. But by and large, when we are looking at any screen, we have a tendency, almost what in psychology you call it a psychological set, to get that information fast. You're often multitasking. You're trying to get this done. So you use, in eye movement research, what is either an F or a Z. So you go like this. Let's scroll down and word spot, and then you get to the bottom. Well, we have that as a set when we read digitally. Even on a Kindle, there's this almost like built-in mechanism that we've learned from the rest of our digital reading to get it done, get it fast, and not necessarily steep ourselves in the discovery process. And that discovery process is discover your own thoughts. So it's a tricky question because it is not a binary. It's not an either or. I only wish it were so simple. Anybody should think about reading digitally if it's just light and superficial. It's just not the way it is. A lot of people have to read online all day, and I'm not going to tell them they aren't deep reading. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But I will tell them there's a set to do this Z or the F and be done and get on with it. Whereas there's a different kind of set when something's super important. And then I just tell people, print it out. Print it out. Or read it in a book, especially for that material that you want to annotate or that you want to experience in its totality, all of those processes that are available. It's a long-winded answer, Eddie.
No, okay. Well, there's a lot that you said in there, and I'm like, I'm gonna go back and watch the podcast. This is really good. So you said something that speaks a lot to me. So again, in our podcast, we read slowly, we take notes, we apply the ideas. You're speaking to the fact that when we're reading on a book, there's a set that just we're trained to read slower in a book. And that slowness gives us the time to connect with our empathy that we're feeling. So if we're reading, let's say we're reading, I don't know, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens or something.
Yeah.
And we're watching Pip engage with Miss Havisham. If we're doing that on a digital, like we're going through, okay, I got it. Pip did this. He went to Sada's house. But when you're slowing down, you can sort of feel what it's like to be in Sada's house with this crazy lady.
Or with Joe, who
Joe
scared the heck out of him, that, and literally those are good examples because, this one passage where Joe is just scaring the heck out of him. You can, when you read it on a screen, you may not experience the same level of fear and anxiety that little boy had inside him. But boy, you might remember it was terrifying to think like he did. And that's what Dickens was very good at. He invited you into the feelings. Well, when you're reading it on a screen, you are potentially missing a good layer or two of those feelings, of identifying with them, of understanding. You might just say, "Oh, he meets a bad character." It's like, okay, that's true,
Oh
but
yeah.
will you experience at the same level the identification with this character? And that's what real reading, or what an English literature person would say close reading. I call it deep reading, when all of that's really coming to bear when you read. And I used in Reader Come Home this analogy. Uh, they did this one study at Stanford, and I think it was called Jane Austen, Your Brain on Jane Austen. And what they showed was that if you are reading at this deeper level, you are even activating your motor system. And I, I remember in Pip, almost, it's not just the motor system, your affective system. I probably was sweating with it. I'm running fast, and my motor cortex might have been running away too. But
Yeah.
it's very, um, it's a beautiful thing what we have developed. It's a beautiful thing that we have all this information, but we have to distinguish, or I would use the word discern, what is the best medium for what kind of reading. And I was
Mm.
just talking to a wonderful group from Amazon, who are trying to design so that deep reading isn't lost. And I say, bravo, really, whatever we can all do to help deep reading not disappear. Well, it is not the case that the time that we apportion to Kindle it's not that it's not possible, it's not probable. That's what's interesting. It's like the brain has already been wired almost, or rewired in the case, as the case is, to go so fast. And that's why that many, in fact, PBS, I think, or NPR, I guess it might have been NPR, did this set of programs with me at some point, where the interviewer was so upset because she could no longer be immersed. And she was just doing all her reading on a Kindle, or iPad, or whatever, or maybe even her phone. A lot of people are just reading on their phone. And she said, the quality of immersion is gone for me. And it reminded me of William Sanford's poem, a quality of attention has been given you. That was a beautiful line from a poem. And it reminded me of that poem, because here we have this beautiful attention possible. And instead, we're just going lickety split to get it done. And I
Yep.
think that society, not just digital, but it's a digital society where efficiency is over beauty
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
thought.
A lot of thoughts are coming in here. This reminds me. It's one of my favorite philosophers. His name's Seneca. Wrote a book
Oh,
called
yes,
Letters from a Stoic. And in
yes.
book two, he suggests that we read fewer authors, but we read them well.
Well, yes.
He's trying to cancel sort of the hustle culture, right? Like,
Well,
pick a couple books and read them really well and let them change
yeah.
your life rather than reading thousands. And this is a good jumping point, because I post videos on YouTube all the time, and I get a little overwhelmed because the people who I'm in competition with on YouTube are posting that they're reading 100 books a year, 200 books a year, and I'm like, how can
Mhm.
you get quality immersion when you're just
Mhm.
hustling through that? Um, I don't know. What's your thought on sort of how this hustle culture is picking up in reading, and how it seems
Oh,
to be a badge of honor?
yeah. There's a wonderful philosopher, a little younger than Seneca.
Study, yeah,
His name is Han Byung-chul. He's a Korean philosopher who lives in Berlin
Mm,
and teaches there. And he said that the real problem in society is acceleration. And he uses the term acceleration and then said, you know, we have, as human beings, we go from one event to the next. And there's time in between these events to linger, to experience. And whether it's a book or an event, we are able to process that because of the time in between. If you have 100 books, that event gap is going to narrower and narrower and narrower. And what Han Byung-chul is emphasizing is the capacity for lingering contemplation, both while we're reading or while we're experiencing an event, and not just jumping, as he said, in an accelerated context. We're jumping from event to event with the gap in between just shortening. So when we shorten the gaps, whether it's between one book and 100 or one book and 10, when we're shortening that, we are lacking in the capacity for what he calls lingering contemplation. And that's when I said there are other deep reading processes, I was really referring to the difference between penultimate processing, where your empathy, inference, analogy, critical analysis, and ultimate. And ultimate is the lingering insight, interiority, sanctuary, whatever word you want to use, where you go beyond, this is the Proustian quote, beyond the wisdom of the author to discover your own. And Proust said that, and that's the reason why my first book was called Proust and the Squid, because Proust had such an understanding of what we really do at the acme, or the highest place, if you will, of what reading gives us. And Han Byung-chul is saying that we can't even get there because we're going so fast that we aren't giving ourselves the contemplative time. Now, he's never read me. I've read him, of course, but he's never read me. But I would say I'm like the brain's version of him. I'm saying the brain is not getting enough time to process things in time, and that our whole society is based on acceleration and efficiency. And efficiency is a great thing, except when we have become so efficient, we've lost the time to give time where we can. So it's efficiency for what?
Yeah.
You know, I don't want that reading brain to go so fast. I don't want you necessarily to read 100 books. If you read 100 books at a deep level, fine. That's great. That's cool.
Yeah.
But that's your pace. It's not everybody's pace. I'd say more likely that, you know, we're lucky if we get to read one book every 2 weeks or given our lives, but to really devote ourselves to that period of time, or a week, you know. I mean, everything is context bound, and we know that. I read a book on a plane trip last night from New York to LA because I had my Kindle, and on my Kindle are the books that I want to be finished by the time I land. And there's that kind of wonderful, entertaining book. I believe in a repertoire, or a repository of different kinds of books for different moods, for different times of day. So it's not the case, though I will tell you one terribly humiliating antidote. It is not the case that I don't use Kindle. And I'll tell you, on one of my trips recently, I'm between two men your age, more or less, and each of them have a book. And I have my Kindle. And I'm like, oh, well, they don't know me. And then this man to my right asked me what I do. And I said, oh, I'm in cognitive neuroscience. I study reading. He says, oh, and you see, you may have heard of this, she's at UCLA, Wolf something, Maryanne something Wolf. And she writes all about, oh my there I am with my Kindle, and he was saying it inspired him to read books, and I just want to die. But then I admit who I am, and he says, "Oh, that is fascinating." And then we talk about the choice of the kind of book he was reading and why it was absolutely right for him to read a book, and why, this kind of very lightweight novel, all I wanted was just cotton candy for my mind. I
Sure.
won't ever say who wrote it.
Yep.
There are good people who write light novels, and bless them. But there
Absolutely.
are people who write for beauty, for the perfect articulation of thought. And if that's the case, they're in my briefcase in a book.
Yeah.
It's choice is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. I had an interview a little while ago with Juno Diaz. The brief.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh,
It was so good.
novel is the closest to telepathy human beings can come.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
He's a wonderful writer and a wonderful human being. And I asked him a similar question. I said, like, what are your tips for reading deeply? How can we get better at reading deeply? And he says, it depends on what you're reading and where you're reading in life. He didn't have like set things. He's like, look,
Yeah.
some of you got little kids and you're
Yes,
busy and
exactly.
right. So like you have to be kind to yourself. He was just very down to earth. I loved it.
Truly. And I just left my daughter-in-law who had she and my son had their first baby, and
Mm.
she reads on her little telephone and said that she absolutely, that's the only thing she can do right now with ease. And I
Yeah,
said, fabulous. And
better. Yeah.
she's one of the people who really can read deeply, regardless of medium. It's
Mm.
just that most of us aren't able to do it at the same level. But I'm with Diaz. It's choice based on context.
Yeah.
But knowing what we know, that increases our ability to choose more accurately,
Mm.
the, whatever that context is, especially whatever kind of book it is, and what our purpose. And that's, I guess, when I talk about choice, it's really what is the purpose for reading this particular book, and that helps me decide what I do.
Okay. I love that. I love that because we only have so much time, and we need to be somewhat dedicated to the books we choose to read so that we can read them well. I was thinking about Oliver Berkman's book, 4,000 Weeks Time Management for Mortals. He talks about in there how we all have a finite amount of life, roughly 4,000 weeks in which we live. And so we need to be very choosy about what we do with our time. But he also says that things in life have time baked into them.
Yes.
Certain things just take the time they take.
Yeah.
And to read a book well, it just
Mhm.
takes the time it takes, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh,
And different books really demand. And I was in a Herman Hesse mood not too long ago. And I wrote about having to return to Herman Hesse's Magister Ludi Gillespie game with great disappointment in myself that I was becoming like everybody else. But as a result of that, I got kind of, how you get it on a roll. So I was
mhm.
reading Narcissus and Goldman, which was completely different from Magister Ludi, which was completely different from Siddhartha. And they were completely different from something I hadn't read, which was Seasons of the Soul, which were his writings and poetry towards the end of his life. And it was like all of them required different amounts of time from me.
Yeah.
One
Yep.
required me heavy duty. One was just the lightest, most beautiful, but still philosophical delight. And then another was completely different. So here's the same one author having different requirements of me in time.
That story, the Magister Ludi story in the book, really hit hard with our book
Yeah.
club. They loved it, and I think it's because they can all relate to it. I wonder if we can dig into that for just a second for people that don't know, because
Yeah.
you you opened up this book thinking, I've been reading a lot of cotton candy lately. I want to read something a little more in depth. So you turned to that book and found that you felt distracted and all over. And
Unable
well,
to read it.
yeah,
It was worse. The worst feeling was, why in the world did I ever love this book? Why did I ever think it was great?
Yeah.
Who ever decided to give him a Nobel Prize
Mm.
for literature based on this? And like having all these really impoverished thoughts about it. And that's actually made me, it wasn't guilt. It was like, what has happened? And
Mm.
am I really just like everybody I'm worried about? Or am I right that this book really wasn't that good?
Mm.
And then it took me almost 2 weeks of settling my brain down. I mean, that was a real toughie. I had to relearn how to read at that immersive level, a very dense and not always welcoming kind of text, even though it's beautiful message. But there's a lot of I guess I would compare it to Thomas Mann, who wrote Magic Mountain, and there was this dialogue between Zetembrini and Nefta with the everyman character, Hans Kastorp, in between. And I was thinking, I couldn't read them either. I couldn't read any of that, which I had thought so meaningful and beautiful to me. I couldn't read any of it. And that was when I had to give myself a tutorial. Never would have thought I had reached the point where I couldn't read the kind of demanding syntax, especially of those kinds of authors. Um, and it took 20 minutes a day first for about 2 weeks. And then it was like a switch. And the switch went off, and it was like calming your brain in a funny way. It made me slip back, not with ease, with difficulty, back into the reader I had once been. And reader come home, one of the meanings is that that helped me come home, reading that book finally. And then by the end of 2 weeks, I was myself again. And then I could read the whole book. And I went back to the beginning and I read it the way it should be read. But it was, honestly, Eddie, it was a miserable moment because I wasn't going to go back. I didn't feel like I had the time. I was like everybody. I didn't have the time to devote to it the time it required of me.
Yeah. Why does that happen? Why do we lose our sense of reading ability? I mean, I know we've talked about distractions and stuff, but what's happening at the brain level?
We have become, that's where I use the philosopher Walter Ong, we have become a changed user of a circuit.
Mm-hmm.
And my circuit was like it's more like the Z pattern. I would read the beginning and then my eye truly darted. It darted. It it spotted with great I'd say expertise the meaningful phrases, and I'd get to the bottom, but I'd move on because that's the way I read on a screen is I'm getting it. I'm getting it. I'm moving on, moving on, moving on. And that's where the acceleration comes in. We're in a society where much is demanded of us, much is in some ways tempting us away from reading at that level. So it's a tough situation where I'd say the majority of people are bombarded with so much that they have to read per day that it is now a defense mechanism to read at a skimming level. It's our defense. And so we get pretty good at getting the major information out, and that gives us what Socrates would have said is the illusion of truth or knowledge, the illusion, when actually what he said was that we are giving our youth the illusion of truth when all they're getting is the superfluity of knowledge. And that's what happens to all of us. I'm convinced that, I mean, there are some people like my daughter-in-law, Laura, who are just so good that they can do it. I'm not there. I may never, ever have the capacity to read as deeply on the screen as I do in print. And maybe there's an age difference too, Woody, because obviously she's considerably younger than me, but she's also a true reader. And I think there are some true readers, bless them, they're so lucky. They can do it. But I'd say most of us are like me, really, that we learn to do a darn fine skim. And we think that we've got it because of that skim. Now, I learned that it was not the case from not just myself, but from the research. Research shows you that you think because you're faster. That's what this one E-Read European study showed, that all these young adults think they're better on the screen. And yet when you ask them these questions, they don't know it, but they're better on print. And so the research is getting more and more powerful, showing how much better we are with this, with the print for various forms of comprehension. Though if it's just getting the information fast, okay, that screen's going to do the job.
Yeah.
So again, a choice, but know the devil that lives on the screens, you know, lurking and making you think that your skim is going to give you everything that a true read would. So
I love it. I feel like we need to create shirts, Maryanne, that says, "I can do a darn fine skim." That should be a t-shirt.
Oh, that's cute. I like it.
And
I've never said that one before.
that was it. You said that, and I'm like, I'm remembering that. That is very good. Yeah, we are programmed, I think, to be faster, better, quicker, smarter at all times. I think Henry David Thoreau said that to read well is a noble exercise or a noble experience. And I think you can feel when you're skimming and when you're experiencing a noble exercise. It's very different.
That's true. And you are really immersed. And I think that's one of the things that most people empathize with when I would give them this information is, oh, you know, I don't feel the same way. Right. You haven't reached that place of, I guess Jen calls it interiority. And, you know, I don't certainly reach it most of my day. I'm lucky in that I think you heard my interview with Ezra Klein when I answered him, and I hadn't ever thought of it in those terms, but I bookend my days. I bookend them, beginning and end. In between heavenly doors, you know, who knows what's in between, but I begin, especially in the morning, it's super important to read. If you would see the just stacks of books that I choose from, just to read one passage in the morning to center me, and it's never more than 1 to 5 pages. That's all. But I read them, if you will, slowly. But it's not the slowness. It's the, I want to think about this. And that centers me to prepare for my F or Z eye movements, you know, when I have to get through something. Though it's really important to people who may have me review their articles in journals or whatever. If it's an article, I print it out if I have to review it, because I know I have to slow myself down. If a publisher says, "Will you review it?" I do it on the screen. You know, what is this something I have an expertise enough to do it? And I make that pass digitally. And then if it's something I have to really help figure out whether that's to be reviewed by that journal or resubmitted or accepted, or just to give feedback to the author, I better print it out or I won't do my best.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I think I at least can relate to that. That if I want to really engage with something, I have to get a physical copy of it. I feel it feels more surface level if I'm on a screen for whatever reason. Even if I can take digital notes, I need something physical. So
Yeah.
I know we're getting close to time with you, and I want to respect your time. But you mentioned that you love to focus most of your effort on children and dyslexia and sort of the progress of reading. And I mean, for people who struggle with dyslexia or kids who are going through that, what can they do to help their kids learn to love reading? Because it's a very frustrating thing to read when the letters aren't lining up.
Yeah. And there's different forms of dyslexia, and some of it that is based only on the speed with which those parts of that reading brain are coming together. And that's
Mm,
the fluency issue that often people don't realize that's a form of dyslexia when it's so laborious. The more common forms are when you have difficulties with representing the sounds of language and connecting them to the letters. That's a more common form. But I want people to know that there are more than one form of dyslexia. So you have to know that. And one of the most important is that about 75% of struggling readers who are dyslexic or whatever have problems with that speed, and that if they haven't gotten automatic enough or fluent enough, it's tough going. Who wants to read when it's so laborious?
yeah.
So a lot of our work is aimed at two things. One, becoming fluent in your decoding so you can read and think deeply about what you're reading. So unlike a lot of programs for dyslexia that are based rightly on the science of reading, ours is based on the science and the story, so that
Mm,
we're really using the program that we had under NICHD years ago was called RAVO, and I have reinvented it, if you will. So it's still very science based and has all the evidence, but that it's much more involved in saying, kids, I want you to love reading. I want you to read deeply. I want you to go at your own pace, but I want you to think and enjoy. And so, this whole program, we're redoing it so that it has what are little stories that are connected every day to what they're learning to decode. So, they're all very coordinated, but that it's inspiring them to have empathy for
mm,
characters who are not like them. So we have characters who have all kinds of differences. Some of our characters are dyslexic, some are have different handicapping conditions, but we try to show how differences make us as a species, and those differences help each other.
mm.
So we're really trying to have deep reading, and this is my most recent to try to help. Here I am in California. So many of our kids are learning English, even though their first language or their second language is another language. So we're trying to make it so that the program helps any speaker of any language learn how to read in English. So um, just one of my former students who just left, I'm working with her on a set of stories called Dog and Frog. And the dog is big and the frog is little. And you wouldn't think they would become best friends, but they are. And each of them have strengths that help the other in life. And so I'm trying really hard to have empathy with
Beautiful.
that which is different, but not enemy. And I think right now in our world where people are making those who are others enemies, that is really antithetical to the development of empathy and what I would call ethical development, much
Yeah.
less the democracy that has to have
Yeah.
different voices heard.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, I think the first time I've been a reader my whole life, but the skill of empathy I think hit me when I first read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. Um,
Ah, yes.
that is an experience reading that I'll never forget. I read that, and it's on my desk right now. That's hilarious. And
Wow.
a video on it.
Wow.
But because I'd read about slavery in history class and I'd read about other things, but to actually experience it through his eyes, then that
Yes.
led me to other narratives. Apparently, many slaves had written narratives, and they've just sort of been lost to history for
Wow.
whatever
Yeah.
reason. You can find them though; they're beautiful. But I love how you're playing on empathy because uh, one, we're coming to books to learn a new skill, but I think we forget that we're also learning how to do this thing called being human. And
Yeah.
we've always used stories
Yeah.
to convey what it means to be human. And so I love it. I love that you're doing that. This platform that you're talking about that sort of helps.
Rainbow. Yeah.
What's it called?
Anybody who anybody who wants it can look up what's called needle learning. That's the Italian word for nest. We want to build reading nests actually for the kids.
Okay,
But
I
it's
like it.
Nido Learning, NIDOlearning.com. But the program's called Ravo. It's been here for 12 years, and yet it was not understood in terms of science. And now we're all big on science, but
Mm,
I want big on science and deep reading.
yeah,
So that's why we're completely redoing it and making it for more kids than just kids who are dyslexic. I love my kids who are dyslexic. My son is dyslexic. That's his art behind me.
oh my
So
gosh,
we're
incredible. The
talking
whole time
we're talking
I've been admiring it.
nature. Isn't it gorgeous?
It's
But anyway,
beautiful.
Ravo is actually becoming a family thing because my son, who's an artist, helped illustrate dog and frog stories. And my other son David is actually created the company for Ravo so that
I
he's
love this.
it's wonderful. But the whole point is we want everybody to love no matter what the struggle. We want them to have their best thoughts possible.
Yeah, I'm in the same vein. I'm doing this podcast as a passion project just because
Yeah.
I feel like books are more than just a sort of an achievement of look, I read a book, great, but like something about a book when it's read well makes you happier, it makes you feel more whole, it makes you care about other humans more, it makes you
Exactly right.
interested in stories, and it makes you smarter. It lets your brain calm down. It's
It
just so many.
definitely makes you smarter, which is
Yeah,
wonderful. But it also makes you more human, which is what you started with. That's what it does.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Understand others.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, before we wrap up, are there any other last thoughts you have about dyslexia, reading deeply, anything you want people to know about?
Oh, I would love them to know that the things that we do for dyslexia are for all readers. You know, all the research we do on the brain, it's for every child, every individual. And I I think some people think, oh, it's just for no, no, no. Our work, I believe, is about reading as a basic, not just human right,
Mhm.
but mm, it's like having human growth inside the pages of a book. That's what it is. It helps the humanity of our species grow and develop in better and better ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Well, I want to thank you for your time. It means a lot to me that you not only came to the show, but the work that you're doing is a big deal. We came across your book. It was actually recommended to me in my book club, Reader Come Home, and so I read it and fell in love with it. And then everybody else started to read it, and now it's all we can talk about. So, if you are wanting to learn more about Maryanne's work, go to the bookstore, pick up Reader Come Home, and start there. And my favorite chapter, of course, is the chapter reading or deep reading. It's a lot of fun because
Yeah,
that's
that was
what.
a good one.
But that's a really good one. Yeah. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
for me, 3, 4, and 9. I don't
yeah,
know. Those just caught my heart, you know.
yeah, yeah. It's good stuff. And for anybody that's interested in attending future author events, we've had Juno Diaz and Yasmin Mohammed and lots of wonderful authors on the podcast. You can join these sessions live by joining the book club. Just go to the readwellpodcast.com, click on the book club up in the top navigation, and then you can meet with us every Tuesday and talk about great works like Reader Come Home and Improve Your Reader Brain. Dr. Wolf, thank you for spending time with us
Thank
today.
you, Elliot. Thank you for your work, and thank you all your readers. Spread it.
Absolutely. I love it. And as always,
Okay.
everybody, remember to read slowly, take notes, and apply the ideas. We'll see you next week.